Hello and welcome back to our kindergarten through 8th grade general music PLC. This is going to be topic 6, and in this topic we're going to be talking all about literacy alignment and how we as music educators can support the literacy education of our students and how literacy and music are connected. In this first segment, I'm going to be talking about just like an intro to that concept and basic strategies you can use in your classroom no matter what grade level we're talking about. So here are a couple of basic ways that music and literacy are aligned and how we can support literacy through what we're already doing. A lot of what we already do as music educators in itself helps to support literacy. And I'm also going to give you ideas of how to kind of like up the ante just a little bit and take what you're already doing and amplify it a little bit to help support that literacy education for our students. So as music educators, often when we're teaching pitch or rhythm especially, we often talk about sound before sight, and we let them audiate the rhythm or audiate the melody before we even show them the notation, and this is very similar to how students learn language in general. There's a strong connection with phonics and music education, especially singing. There is a strong connection between syllabic representation and rhythm. So understanding how the syllables of a word are broken down, and then that's often used to create the rhythm of a song or a poem. We often read stories anyway in our classroom, so we can take moments in that story reading to really bring out some questions that help the students comprehend the text that you're reading. This is the same as the text in a song as well. We can take time to kind of break down the lyrics of a song and help students understand and comprehend what that song might be about. Fluency in reading is being able to read with expression and not a halting type of speaking. And we do that in music anyway when we have a steady beat and we have expressive elements in the music. So that's a very strong connection. And finally, as music educators, we are teaching literacy in our own classroom because we're teaching music literacy and how to read, notate, and compose music, which is very strongly connected to how students learn to read and write in other classes as well. So let's go into a little bit more detail. There is a lot about phonics that we already do that can support what they're actually learning in their reading class. And I had the opportunity to talk to some of my reading and language arts teachers at my building, and we kind of sat down and compared notes and realized that there's a lot of overlap in what we're teaching. Often when we're teaching singing, we talk about diphthongs, and this is something the students are learning starting at a very young age. I learned the term digraphs, which is something that I knew what it was, but I didn't know the term for it. Digraphs is when there are two letters that come together to make one sound, like an SH makes sh, or CH makes sh, or TH makes th. So we talk about how to make those sounds in our singing often. Blends are two letters that go together that sound like SM or BL or DR. So a blend, BL, and we will talk about how to make that sound, especially when we're singing again. And then voiced and unvoiced letters, like T is unvoiced and B is voiced. Obviously, when we're talking about voiced syllables and voiced consonants, that is something that is relevant to what we're teaching, especially when it's at the end of words. And we have to teach the students how to close out a word in singing so we're all ending at the same time and in the same way. And then just phonemic awareness, different in using different phonics and different mouth shapes. And we do this all the time in music, but knowing what those are called and being able to label those the way that they're labeling them in their language arts classes and reading classes will help bridge that gap for our students. So I found this on a website called howmanysyllables.com. And so the word syllable has 3 syllables. And there are lots of ways that we can talk about syllables with our students and the way that they're learning them in their reading class, putting their hands on their chin and saying syllable. How many times did you move? So that's a 3-note word, a 3-syllable word. Um, for your older students, it might be an interesting opportunity to talk about anacrusis. Um, I talked a lot with my reading teachers about how we do name games, and my name, Ariel, has a stress on the first syllable, but a name like Elizabeth has that anacrusis. So, how would that fit in rhythmically? So, that's another opportunity to make that connection. Another way that we're bringing literacy into our music classroom is through interactive book reading, which is another way of saying read aloud. And when we're reading books to our students and incorporating music in some way. And we often do this a lot with our younger students. I used to be afraid of doing it with my older students, thinking that they might roll their eyes a little bit with incorporating children's literature. But depending on what the musical concept is that you're connecting it with, it can be very engaging for students of any grade level. So when we're reading about any story, and I'll give you strategies for how to connect this with music in just a little bit. But anytime you're reading a story, you can take a moment. It doesn't have to be a drawn out event, but just take one moment and have students talk about what are the characters, how many characters are there, what is the setting, can you identify the problem that occurred in the story, what's the mood of the story, and that's a really big one for connecting back to music. What do you think the author's purpose was of writing the story? Was it to persuade? Was it to entertain? Was it to educate? Why did the author choose to write this story? What are some textual inferences you can make? What are the feelings? Why did the characters choose to act that way? And you can have them use pictures as context clues as well. Have the students make predictions. Before you turn the page, say, what do you think is going to happen next? You can use props like puppets and pictures and a lot of hands-on items when you're reading a story to make it more engaging. And ask those W questions throughout your read aloud. Who, what, when, where, and why. So who are the characters? What are we talking about? What is happening in the story? What is this object in the story? When did the story occur? Where did the story occur? What's the setting? And again, why? Why did this happen in the story? Why did the author choose to write this? And so just bringing out those questions and having students make those connections. Again, it doesn't have to be taking over your whole lesson, but just take a moment when you're reading the book to acknowledge those questions. Another literacy connection is vocabulary. We teach a lot of vocabulary in the music classroom, and students are learning vocabulary and academic language throughout their school time. So when I say academic language, I mean, don't be afraid to use those musical terms in your classroom. You don't need to kind of water it down for your students. Make sure that you are using the vocabulary that you're supposed to be teaching as if they already know what it is in your instruction so that students become more familiar with those vocabulary terms. You can label things. I have boxes of instruments throughout my classroom and everything is labeled so that students can become more familiar with those vocabulary terms. You can play word sorting games, such as if you had 3 categories of tempo, articulation, and dynamics, and then handed them the vocabulary cards of largo or forte or staccato and having them sort in the different categories. That's one idea. When you introduce new words, there are many ways and many strategies for doing that. You can show the word visually. So here you see that I have posted vocabulary on my board for when we do any lesson. I have the vocabulary written there for them to reference throughout the lesson. You can talk about the word structure. For example, if it's a compound word, when I teach the word pentatonic, I break it down how many sides does a pentagon have. It has 5. Tonic sounds a lot like tone, which is another word for pitch. So pentatonic, 5 pitches. So break it down like that. There can be multiple words and multiple meanings of a word, especially for those foreign language words. We can make those connections, like accelerando means accelerate. And we can make that connection that means to get faster to help the students understand those terms. And we can use synonyms and student-generated word webs or semantic maps. I've even seen teachers have vocabulary notebooks where they have the students have a small notebook. Usually it's just like construction paper stapled together, and they keep it in the music classroom. And anytime they learn a new music vocabulary term, they write it down in their notebook, maybe draw a picture to make that connection. And then at the end of the year, they have that notebook with all their vocabulary terms to take home. When we're talking about fluency, again, we're talking about using a smooth voice while we're reading and adding expressive elements while we're reading. And this is something we do all the time in the music classroom. So we can show them a basic rhythm and then talk about how to add more expressive elements to it, and then add words and have them add these expressive elements to it. One project I do when I'm teaching about these expressive elements is a poetry project where I give them a children's poem, and they have to figure out what kind of tempo they want to use, where they want it to crescendo, where they want it to decrescendo, what kind of articulation they want to use in their reading. So that's a direct connection right there. And then, of course, music literacy, when we are teaching our own reading in our class. So we're teaching how to read the notes and the pitches and the rhythms. And we are teaching them how to notate, which is similar to learning to write your alphabet, right? And then we're teaching them to compose their own original music, which is similar to writing their own stories. So we can make those connections with how they do that in their regular classroom. So this has been an introduction to how music and literacy can support one another. In the next two segments, I'm going to talk about some strategies for the primary grades, kindergarten, first and second grade, and then the upper elementary and secondary grades, so third grade through eighth grade. And there are so many more ideas than I have time to discuss in this segment. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what your comments are and how you make the connection between literacy and music in your classroom.